Reynolds Price is here. He is a professor of English at Duke University. He has written more than 35 volumes, including fiction, poetry, and essays. His latest work is A Serious Way of Wondering, The Ethics of Jesus Imagined. He is a friend of this program, and I'm happy to welcome him back to this table. Welcome back.
Delighted to be back.
Now, tell me where this all came from. I mean, someone said to me that you went up to Memorial Church and gave a lecture after 9/11 and began to think about this.
I did
subjects.
that, and I had been asked to give a lecture that was named after someone who had taught ethics at Harvard in the 19th century, and I thought, well, I'll go back to the source, and I started thinking about the ethics of Jesus, which I suppose is the thing that people who call themselves Christians most think about, you know, in his life. What did he say we should or shouldn't do? And I decided to start trying to imagine my way into something, to invent situations in which he especially encountered, as he does in this volume, 3 situations which very much trouble
contemporary America,
the church, etc. today, but which he doesn't encounter at all in the Gospels.
Homosexuality,
suicide, and the whole situation of women in male-dominated societies. I mentioned.
So we don't know what Jesus said about any of those things.
No, we don't know. We do know that though the Christian church has very heavily concerned itself with sex and urged sexual puritanism upon us, he seems not to have been very interested in sex.
You mean interested in sex in terms as a subject of discussion?
No, he advises against fornication, what's translated as fornication, so sexual immorality, whatever he meant by that, and he didn't expatiate, except to say that anyone who harmed a child should have a millstone put around his neck and thrown into the sea, with which I'm in entire agreement with him. But so far as sexual immorality is concerned, we know very little as to what he meant by that.
So what do you imagine he meant? Would have meant? What do you imagine he would have said based on what he said about other things?
It's very hard for me to imagine that he thought the creator of the universe, the creator, you know, the manager of the stars and the Pleiades, etc., was very concerned with what you and I did with certain pieces of pink or brown or yellow or red flesh.
Yeah.
He
would not have seen it as a moral issue.
I don't know. I do know that he seems to have been followed around the countryside in the very brief period of his teaching, which was somewhere between 1 and 3 years. He was followed around the countryside by this group of men, and very strangely,
these are the disciples we're talking about?
Yeah, and other people who were apparently not called the disciples. And very strangely, for the time and place, a number of women. And in the Gospel of Luke, Luke says the women provided for him out of their resources. Well, what kind of resources could they imagine if they had? What kinds of resources? Were their husbands giving them money to give to this man? How were they earning money? What jobs were available for women in that culture? I can think of only one.
What was
prostitution.
That? Really?
And he does say...
so did he speak about prostitution?
Yeah, well, he spoke very movingly when he said that the tax collectors and the prostitutes would get into heaven before the high priest.
He said that?
Yes. He does. It's actually right there in the Bible.
I like Jesus better and better.
I like Jesus better every day.
Anything else he said about prostitutes?
Well, he seems to have spent a good deal of time in the presence of these outcasts from society.
Speaking of Jesus and women and the Last Supper, what do you make of this Da Vinci Code? Everybody's talking about Mary Magdalene now.
Yeah.
What, do you know the scriptures as well as any non-religious scholar I know?
Right. I saw that program the other night
on ABC. Elizabeth Vargas
asked to see it, and I did see it.
Did you review it, or you just?
No, I saw it, and I was interested. And I have not read the Da Vinci Code, and I
not your kind of literature, or
not
what?
my kind of book. I did read that one, which sort of claims that Mary Magdalene, escaped from Palestine and made it all the way to France, and engendered with Jesus this long line of distinguished Frenchmen. I thought that was wonderful, because what else would they have engendered? However, Whether Jesus was married or not, I don't know. I think it's entirely possible that he was.
Do you really?
Yes.
Simply because you have no evidence that he wasn't, or because
you have no evidence that he wasn't. Though I did think on that program they brought up something interesting, which was that Paul says, I guess in 1 Corinthians, that Paul says, Peter has a wife. Couldn't I have a wife if I wanted one? And
Paul said that in 2 Corinthians?
Apparently, Paul says this. I had forgot it.
Yeah.
But he doesn't say Jesus had a wife. So does that mean Jesus didn't? We have no idea.
And if Jesus had a wife, he probably would have used it at the same time as other than Paul.
Might well have said
a higher authority.
Yeah. But rabbis in general were married,
yeah.
and this young teacher might have been married.
Now, where does all this come from?
Anthony Burgess, by the way, wrote an interesting book about Jesus, a novel, the name of which I've, of course, forgotten now. But Burgess gave him
Clockwork Orange,
something like that, Clockwork Jesus, and he imagined Jesus as having had a wife very early in his life, and then she died in childbirth or something like that, and he didn't.
But tell me, I knew nothing about this whole curiosity about Mary Magdalene.
Yeah,
what's that about?
Well, Mary Magdalene is a woman who doesn't appear very frequently in the Gospels.
Yeah.
We're told that Jesus expelled, 7 demons. Is it 9 or 7 demons from her? We don't know what that means. Obviously it means she had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
She does seem to have been from Magdala, which was a sort of town up on the sort of northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And we do know that she's in the accounts that are given of resurrection appearances of Jesus, she's the first person he appears to.
Have you and Elaine, here's what I was going to do. When all this the world was curious about this, because this book is such a big bestseller, The Da Vinci Code, I was going to call you up and Elaine Pagels and say, let's do a program about this. That's exactly what ABC did in terms of a film thing on ABC. Right. And I understand it went through the roof from a rating standpoint.
Did it? I bet it did. Yeah.
I can't. So, because everybody's fascinated by stuff like this.
Absolutely.
Now, have you ever had a conversation with Elaine about this?
I have not. Not that particular subject.
Because she's writing here, she says about your book, having carefully investigated and marveled at the gospel for decades, Reynolds Price offers this insightful, challenging, and moving reflection. For me, it was nonstop reading. Yeah. But you two have never had this discussion about Mary Magdalene and sort of the notion of, what about the Da Vinci's Last Supper? The painting.
Well, I thought it was interesting, that suggestion that the person who's right there to Jesus' anatomical right. Is a woman.
Right.
And I took a look, and I've been in the room with the painting itself, the fresco, and
where is it, in Florence?
It's in Milan.
In Milan.
And it's extremely hard to see anything. It's recently been restored for the umpteenth time, and apparently looks better than ever. And it did indeed, and it looked wonderful for its close up in the special. But I don't know whether that's just meant to be a very young man or a woman.
Did Jesus say anything about suicide?
Leonardo da Vinci was a very strange man.
Sorry.
And he was a very strange Leonardo. And I wouldn't be
strange
surprised.
In what way?
Well, he is. I mean, yeah, he lived a kind of unanalyzable life that we don't really know about.
Really?
He never married. Whether he was homosexual or not, we don't know. He was once.
I always assumed he was for some reason. I don't know. We don't know.
He was once accused of it in Florence when he was a relatively young man.
But it's not conventional wisdom that he was homosexual, or it is.
I think it is.
That's what I thought.
But of course, we don't have the Polaroids.
Right.
But we do have these endless drawings.
Okay, so it's not some accepted notion that Leonardo was homosexual.
It is pretty much accepted.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
What else would make him strange, though?
Oh, the way that he worked, the way that he was constantly beginning extraordinary projects and abandoning them unfinished. Extraordinary lack of major paintings that he ever completed, though he was obviously infinitely the most gifted man of his particular generation.
Right. That's what I would say. I mean, just how could one man have such extraordinary talent?
And just these endless sort of notes that he kept in that strange backward left hand.
Yeah, and the drawings too. Just the drawings and everything.
Well, no one was ever,
imagining the
anatomy
in a way that was extraordinary.
Inventing modern warfare and inventing flying machines.
Okay, let me turn to suicide. Did Jesus say what might we imagine he said about suicide or thought about suicide?
I think he would have regretted it. I think he would have thought. We have to get all the way down to St. Augustine in the 4th century before people begin to equate suicide with murder. Augustine essentially says suicide is an act of murder. You're murdering yourself.
Yeah.
And then the Christian church from then on became, very heavily anti-suicide, to the point where even now there are many sects of Christianity and some of the sects of Judaism which condemn it in very hard terms. I wrote a little narrative in here in which, on the contrary, Jesus assists someone in an act of suicide.
He did?
He did.
In
my imagination.
All right, but don't read. Let me go to this. You had this. You keep writing about. You come back constantly to religion.
I do. Yeah.
Now, is that because you were? Are you thinking about death, or are you thinking about a celebration of life, or because of the cancer that robbed you of your ability to walk,
right?
Gave you a closer spiritual connection to Jesus?
I think I've been religious all my adult life.
We started in Warren County.
Throughout my childhood, exactly where we all started.
Yeah, exactly.
You and I, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
But by the time I was 21 at Duke University, listening to sermons in Duke Chapel, right. I slowly, much too slowly, began to realize that I had never heard in any Christian church one single word of condemnation of racism, which was the greatest horrendous wrong of your and my childhood and of the whole United States, and continues to be. And from then on, I withdrew from anything that could be called organized religions.
When you discovered that you had cancer of the spine,
right?
I mean, you spoke to God.
Oh, surely.
And said, "What's going on?"
Prayed my head off. Yeah.
As well, we all would. You know, that's what they say.
Yeah.
No atheist in a foxhole kind of thing.
Yeah.
So did God speak to you about love and say?
Absolutely not.
He didn't.
No.
What did he say?
That book I wrote about cancer, A Whole New Life. There was one night when I was staying with cousins in Goldsboro, North Carolina, because I couldn't stay alone, and I was lying there, and things were going extremely badly, and I just lay there in the dark, and I just sort of said, fairly idly to the ceiling, how much more of this is there going to be? And I really did hear a single word answer, and I don't know, obviously if you'd had your tape recorder on, I don't think you'd have got anything. Right. But I really did hear the word more. And it's very hard to imagine how a God who loves one as intensely as Jesus says he did, puts human beings through what we constantly watch human beings go through. I think the most interesting single Hebrew scripture on the subject, of course, is the book of Job, where God just says to Job, when he says, "Sir, please tell me why all this has happened to me." And God says, "Were you with me when I created the universe? If not, sit down and shut up." And is that something Jesus was wrong about? I don't know. I'm very interested in it. And it is interesting that his last words on the cross
were
in the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, the oldest of all the Gospels, his last words on the cross are a quotation from a Hebrew psalm which says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then Mark says, he gave a loud cry and breathed his last.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Now, people who wish to rescue that saying say that if you go all the way through to the end of this long psalm, it ends rather happily. I don't think he was up there thinking about a psalm that ended rather happily if he's up there with, spikes through his arms.
Saying, why haven't you delivered me?
Exactly.
I'm your son.
Yep. Then he wakes up on Sunday morning. Mary Magdalene is standing there.
That's right. She discovers the fact he's not going
there,
doesn't she?
Bless the women's hearts. All the men deserted him.
And
all the men deserted him on Thursday night, and the women didn't. They don't, do they?
No.
They don't.
God for women. What is there one? I mean, do you have some abiding passion to write something Of all the 30, what did I say, 30-plus books? How many?
35.
35
Yeah, that's
books.
number 35.
This
yeah.
is 35.
Yeah.
But that includes essays, that includes plays, that includes, or just, what is it?
It includes full-length books.
Okay.
Yeah, of essays, plays, exactly, whatever, poems.
Yeah. What's the closest thing we've come to the great American novel? I tell you that because Martin Amis was here in a broadcast,
Right.
and he said August, March. It's all about
August, March.
Right, August, March. Right.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, I wouldn't have said that.
What would you say?
If I started talking about favorite American novels, yeah, I don't know that I would be even remotely try to talk about a best.
Oh, you
People
wouldn't.
always say Moby Dick, and I find that very hard to read. My own particular favorite is probably virtually any early Hemingway novel.
Really?
Yeah. The Sun Also Rises is probably my personal favorite
American novel.
American novel.
Oh,
Whether it's the
no
greatest
Faulkner? No Faulkner? I mean,
I'm not Faulkner's greatest lover. I don't think he would have minded that very much, but
even though at a young, after a long and happy life, people used to sort of write about Reynolds Price as the next Faulkner.
Yeah, they got the Faulkner Prize, and I told someone the other day, actually I saw him just a few weeks before he died. I didn't have the nerve to go up and introduce myself to him because I'd heard he was pretty rough, and I didn't want him to just say, buzz off, youngster. But yeah, sure, there's wonderful Faulkner stuff. I mean, The Sound of the Fury is certainly a great novel, but they're not things that I find myself rereading. And the one that Absalom, the one that so many people think of as his finest work and perhaps the best American novel. I mean, Absalom is a novel which for me has always been sort of like a rubber tennis net. I run into it, it throws me back out. Yeah. I've never been able to finish reading it. It's just too difficult. Yeah. It just asks too much of the reader, I think.
Is there an idea for a novel that you very much have tried throughout your life to get your hands around? You can't and haven't, and you start and stop because it's
no,
impossible.
For better or worse, I've finished everything I started, and published it. I'm not a quitter.
You have no regrets about your writing life?
No. I don't necessarily think everything is absolutely marvelous, but I don't regret any particular book. And there's some that I like very much indeed.
Which one is the best?
I would place in the hands of any child. Which one is the best?
Yeah.
Oh, I think really the trilogy, the trilogy about the Mayfield family, beginning with The Surface of Earth, The Source of Light, and The Promise of Rest. I think The Surface of Earth is the best of the novels.
This one, A Serious Way of Wondering, The Ethics of Jesus, imagined by Reynolds Price. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.